This is to the listeners right now. You got to get really clear on what your goals are. And for me, it was cash flow. Cash flow. Like it just had to be cash flow.
You're listening to the Just Start Real Estate Podcast. If you're serious about your real estate investing business and need real answers, you are in the right place. And now, your host, Mike Simmons.
All right. Thank you for joining me on Just Start Real Estate. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the focus and the energy being right here where we are. I've got a good one for you today, guys. Great story, great guy. Had a lot of fun interviewing him, and I think it will. The story itself is very relatable in terms of how he built his business. Where he comes from might not be as relatable because he's not from the United States. He came from another country, came here, and within a relatively short period of time, absolutely built an awesome business, and that should be inspirational to everybody. In 2012, he quit his job in Australia and moved halfway across the globe to the United States to change his life and chase his dreams with limited funds, no investing experience at all, didn't even know what the word entrepreneur was, and no credit. Reed went from purchasing a small duplex to growing his own real estate investing firm, Wildhorn Capital. Kind of a cool name, FYI. Today, Reed is a real estate investor, best-selling author, entrepreneur, and podcast host, and all-around good guy. He's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed interviewing him. I think that comes through pretty loud and clear. You know, when I really kind of like hit it off with someone well, I think it's pretty obvious. So Reed was one of those guys. We had a good conversation, had a little chat after the interview was over. I just really enjoyed talking to him because he's a good guy and a smart guy. So without any further ado, guys, I give you Reed Goossens. All right, Reed, thank you for being here. Thanks for agreeing to do this. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
G'day, mate. Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be on here.
Yeah. First of all, I love Australian accents. They're very cool. It's tempting to imitate them, and I know it's horrible and probably offensive how bad I am. But I may do that before we're done. But I'll wait until I know you better.
Give us your best shot. No offense taken.
I always try just by saying your country name because it's a good name to say in the accent. Australia.
Yeah, it's a little nasally. It's a little not enunciating the O's and the A's. Okay. You don't move your mouth a whole lot. You know what I mean?
I love it, man. You guys have Wolverine, you have Thor, and for me, that's good enough. You guys are badass. Now, all joking aside, though, man, it's good to have you here. I appreciate it. Your story's awesome. I definitely do some digging before anybody gets on my show to kind of get to know them a little bit better and try to discern what I can about their story. But there's a lot I don't know. So if you don't mind, let's go back in time a little bit here and rewind back to Australia. I don't know how to say it. Rewind back to your country, Australia, and tell us what was happening before you left. What was the reason why you came to the States? And then kind of give us that backstory before we dig too much into real estate.
Sure, yeah, and I'll try and make it as short as possible. Yeah. But it actually started a pre-trip. So graduated uni in 2007 and went straight overseas. I went to London, and my trade is structural engineering. That's what I went to school for, and I spent a better part of a decade in the industry. Moved to London to work on the 2012 Olympic Games, but it was in 2008 as a sort of because all the infrastructure needed to be built. Spent a year there. Then was in the south of France having a year working on the super yachts. If you've ever seen the Below Deck show or the Bravo show Below Deck, I have. I was working for a Russian billionaire. I was a deckhand. And in that time, and again, I'm skipping over a lot of things. I'm sure you want to ask a lot. In that time, I was backpacking in Spain and met a girl on the beach who happened to be American. We kept in contact. I went back to Australia. She happened to come out to Australia to do her master's degree. And the reason I ended up moving back to the United States in 2012, so we're going from 2008, 2009. In 2010, she moves to Australia. 2011, was a bit of a nothing year. And then 2012 was like, hey, I really want to live in the United States again because I'd already had that bug of living overseas and being an expat. Yep. I'd come through the United States in late 2009, backpacking around and fell in love with New York City. And that's where I was like, okay, there's this girl there. She's moving to Australia for a period of time for a master's, but maybe when we finish, do you want to move back to New York? Like, 'cause I really want to live in New York. And so it was really just more of a scratching of the itch. And, Australians by nature, by our DNA, we want to go and explore the world because Aussie is a long way away and down under, and we're pretty much all the same. And so we want to go out and experience, other experiences in life. And for me, it was, I lived in London already for a period of time, lived in the south of France, really loved being that expat, not just a tourist, and getting a job, and that was to live in New York City. So the whole impetus of moving to the United States was really just to be an expat, and the goal was just to be here for a couple of years and then move back to Australia. But obviously a lot has changed since then. So
that was a long, eloquent way of saying you moved here for a girl. Just say it. You moved for a girl. That's what all that was about.
I say two loves: New York City and Erica, she's now my wife. So we put a ring on it. So
good. That's a nice ending to that beginning. So good. All right. So I do have to dig into a little bit the on the yacht with the billionaire.
Sure.
How long did that last?
So the whole thing was 2008 hit. Luckily, I had a job already lined up in London. Moved to London, did a year. My visa was only for a year, and at the end of that year, I was like, I wasn't ready to go home. I had a friend of mine who was already working in London. We'd happened to be studying civil engineering together. He was already in the south of France. Like, dude, you got to come down and do this yacht working thing. I was like, what the hell does that mean? And so I rock up with like less than €1,000 in my pocket. I did like a week safety course at sea. And then I just started walking the docks and networking in a place called Antibes in the south of France, and just got day work here and there, living in a hostel, partying, living on the beach and partying throughout the day. Then I finally got a job on his boat. And we were, I was yes, so, no, so, how high do you want to jump, sir? It was very, it's a weird industry, a lot of money, filthy rich. None of us were allowed to know how to speak Russian on board. Just take that as you will. So, and I've got a lot more stories I could probably tell you over beer that's not maybe suitable for podcast radio.
Oh my gosh. I so badly want to have that beer right now. I really would love to hear these stories. They must have been awesome. I have seen Below Deck. I've seen the show. A lot of craziness going on among the crew on the show. Obviously, it's a TV show. I get that. But was it a lot of fun? Did you have a good time? Oh,
mate, the best experience of my entire life. Rocking up there with not much money in my pocket, with the backpack on my back, I ended up saving a ton of money, working for these billionaires. I got to sail across the Atlantic Ocean because when the winter happens in the Mediterranean, all the boats come to Florida or the Caribbean. So I was at sea for 15 days. Like, it was just, world changing. Life in a bag. Just living my life on my terms, and that was really the start of like enjoying like my young 20s and saying, I'm so glad I did this because I would never have another opportunity to do it again. And I took it with both hands.
Yeah,
so,
that's cool. So did you know prior to that whether or not you would be seasick for 15 days, or did you know whether or not you could handle that?
Well, yeah, good question, because I'd been doing about 3 or 4 months in the Mediterranean as the summer ended, trips with the boss and guests and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't until we actually started the crossing that I got very sick the first couple of nights. Really? And it did teach me that I'm not a seaman. I'm not a salty sea dog. I love a good oak tree and feet, planted directly on the ground. So as much as that industry was just a crazy, weird industry, it was just, I got to see awesome parts of the world and see a life that these people live that it blows your mind. So
it's got to be absolutely mind blowing. Yeah, that's really cool. I've never met anybody who actually did it, but that's interesting. It is probably a really cool experience for sure at that age. So okay, let's go forward a little bit now. So you said you fell in love with New York City. I know you happen to be in LA. Why aren't you in New York? What brought you to LA?
My wife. So okay. we in 2012 we moved to New York City just to give it a go. For me, being an Australian, there was a very good visa, a working visa that if you've got a white collar job, which I did, a structural engineer, you could get a 2-year visa that could be renewed indefinitely based on that job. So it wasn't, and I was like, look, this girl's awesome. She wanted to move to New York City and just live there for a period of time. And she's originally from LA. So after 2 years, we ended up moving back to LA and love it, so I've been here ever since.
So how did you get involved in real estate? How did that happen?
Yeah. So go back to finishing on the yachts and was in the Caribbean, then backpacked through, this is in 2009, then backpacked through the States. And that's when I fell in love with New York. And then finally went back to Australia in early 2010, was sitting at my back of my structural engineering job and just having 2 years abroad, gallivanting around the south of France. It was just an incredible experience. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm now just sitting in a cubicle and that's it. Like I'm 25, 26.
I don't give you the bends. You got to be careful. It's a little too much of a change.
Yeah. So it really, to me, was like, how the hell do I get someone to pay me to go traveling? Right. And that's where it started from. And more to do with like that life of living, in a suitcase or life in a backpack. And that was really invigorating for me. And it was life on my own terms. And so being in a corporate world, feeling like I was a really small cog in a big machine and just going, this ain't for me for the next 40 years of my life. So yeah. I knew that I had more to give. It just, what was that more to give? And that's when I stumbled upon the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the word entrepreneurship. I didn't even know what that was, and all of a sudden I was like, okay, I need to choose to invest my money. How do I do that? Well, let's talk about real estate because I happen to be building things. I'm a structural engineer. Like I was already sort of in an industry that was rubbing shoulders with developers. It was sort of the blinkers came off a little bit. Yes, yeah. I was, the guy who could mathematically tell if a building was going to fall down or not. Yeah. But you also are quite close to being like, okay, well, hang on, that's the developer over there. Let's go. Don't worry about how many bolts you're going to put in that connection. What are you going to rent this space for?
Yeah.
So that was just sort of like so that was in 2010. Started self-educating in Australia, going to real estate events in Aussie, was going to do something in Australia through saving money, like whether it be a fix and flip or a lease option, but then also had that itch to want to move back to, move abroad again. And so made that decision to say, screw it, let's go give it a crack. Didn't have a job lined up when I moved to New York. I was pounding the streets to try and get an engineering job. I finally did, got the visa. And then, within, I think, a month of being fresh off the boat in New York City, I was at the first RIA, Real Estate Investment Associations. And that, to me, was just, for those people listening to this show, you guys don't realize the tapestry or the infrastructure you guys have got here in the United States in terms of real estate, those RIAs. Like they're on every MSA. I come from a country, I just happen to live in a city where the only national real estate club, so to speak, was in my city, in my backyard, which was only still pretty small. So to come here and know that there was one in New York City, there was one in Philadelphia, there was one in LA, like it was just like, and I could pay $30 at the door and get this incredible information. Yeah. I would have to pay a guru tens of thousands of dollars in Australia to teach me that same type of information. So just coming from what I knew and seeing the access to information was just such a big game changer for me and something I really appreciated. So, yeah.
Yeah, I do think that, in America, we're this way, but I think anytime anybody has an abundance of anything, it's hard to appreciate it. You're in the middle of it. And I get that. It's absolutely true. Now, back in Australia, aside from the fact that there aren't a lot of RIAs and the information isn't as easy to get to, is the real estate game at all similar, or how different is it there?
Yeah, so to put it in blatant terms, think of, so Australia is the same land mass, exclude Alaska, but Australia is the same land mass, give or take, as mainland America. Mm-hmm. However, we only have 25 million people because it's a desert. It's I think it's one of the most arid islands in the world. Mm-hmm. And so we can only inhabit the coasts, right? And with 25 million people, we only inhabit like 18% of our land, and it's around major cities. Yeah. And so think of LA, New York, high appreciation markets. That's what Australia is. So you're not buying for cash flow. You're buying for negatively geared. There might be some cash flow in the outer suburbs if you buy at the right time, but it's not like I could go to these secondary, tertiary markets like you have here in the United States and buy something for $30,000, which was my first property that I bought. Right. So it was just completely different when I came here. So through the RIAs, it was this opening Pandora's box. And yes, I couldn't afford New York City because that's where I was living, but 4 hours drive away, I could.
Yeah.
I could buy something for $35,000 and buy it all cash because, being fresh off the boat, I didn't have a credit score, right? I didn't even know what a credit score was when I first moved to the United States. So all these things were like, wow. Like all these wow factors. And I didn't come from this. So this was, wow, I can buy a triplex for $38,000. Like that's great. Like I can cash flow $700 a month. Sign me up.
Yeah.
So that was the start of it. But to your original question, yes, Australia is it's a high appreciation market, high demand, low supply, but also the population is a lot smaller than the United States.
Yeah.
Thus, and we can't inhabit the entire country where you guys can inhabit north, south, east, west. And you got this massive population. So it spawns these second and tertiary markets outside the major coastal markets, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally does. So when you said your first property was a $30,000 property, was this when you were still living in New York? You bought it? Where'd you buy the property? I guess is what I'm kind of getting at.
So going to those REIAs, met a few folks, and just chose. I was like, I've got some money to invest. And at this point, Mike, I've been in self-educating for nearly 2 years now, right? So, and I hadn't actually done anything, right? By the time I picked up Rich Dad Poor Dad, doing the stuff in Australia, then moved to the United States, started going to the REIAs, and I was like, okay, there's affordable markets. There's a couple of affordable markets. Philadelphia is one of them, and there's a couple of markets, Rochester and Syracuse. They're all within a bus drive. I remember getting on the Greyhound bus at the Penn Station, and I chose Syracuse, no other than the fact that someone out the REIA happened to be investing up there, and I was like, sweet, let's go up, and I can get on a Greyhound bus. It takes me 4 hours to get up there on a Saturday morning. I can check out a few little properties and get back for a couple of beers with the boys and my girlfriend by Saturday night. So that was all it was. I could afford it. I could drive to it. And that's what got me started, right? It was just going up there because I got to the point where I was nose stuck in a book, analysis paralysis on the subway, and going, if I'm not going to be able to, the true learning for me was going to go out and do a deal. Yeah. I'm not going to get to deal number 10 without doing that first deal. Yep. And so for me, it was like, okay, what's the risks here? It could go sideways, right? All right, well, it's my own money. I'm willing to, it's $35,000. It ain't, it's a lot of money. I'd saved up that from probably many years of being in the corporate world, but it was also my money. It was no one else's money, right? Yeah. And so I was willing to put that up, and you could pay $30,000 for a Rich Dad Poor Dad mentorship course, So for me, it was like, this is a no-brainer. I'm going to go do it. And that was the start of the journey, and it got me off the mark. It gave me the permission to say, hey, I can do this. Yeah. I can go out and learn a market and learn what to and not to buy and what to buy. I still had my stumbling blocks along the way, like in any first deal, but it got me off the starting blocks, and that was the most important part.
Yeah, I like that too. The only way you get to your 10th deal is to do your first deal, and that's so true. I think doing that first deal, it was for me too. It was the greatest learning. You spent 2 years after you read Rich Dad Poor Dad kind of before you actually did it. I spent 5. I know what it's like. I discovered real estate and fell in love with it. And then it took me 5 years through a lot of, but there was some personal stuff happening, plenty of excuses, but that's all they are, right? At the end of the day, I think I was just afraid of failure. I was afraid of looking stupid. I was afraid of not knowing enough. And, honestly, part of that thing we talked about where we have so much abundance and so much information available to us, we don't appreciate it. One of the drawbacks, though, I will say, of having all these REIAs and all this free and really cheap information is it can be confusing when you're starting. And yes. I would go to REIAs, and every month they would have a new speaker who was talking about how he or she is doing it, and they would convince you that if you didn't do it this way, you're stupid. You have to do it this way. It's the best way. And then next month it's somebody else. So I got a lot of shiny object, and it's sort of like, this is a great problem to have here. It's not really something to complain about, but I had so much information, I didn't know what to do with it all. I was overwhelmed with the possibilities. And that was just one of the reasons. But at the end of the day, it's on me. If you don't get started, I firmly believe if you are sitting there listening to this and you've been saying you want to be in real estate for a number of years or months or weeks, and you're not taking action, it's on you. There's no reason not to, right? I mean, we have a guy here who came from another country, came over and made it happen, right? So,
and to your point, I love what you just said there. I remember the shiny objects, should I do wholesaling or should I do something else, flipping, it's just so many options. And I think the clarity of what your goals are, and this is to the listeners right now, talking directly, you guys who are sitting on the fence, you got to get really clear on what your goals are. And for me, it was cash flow. Cash flow. Like it just had to be cash flow.
Yeah.
So how was the easiest way to do that? Well, buying small triplexes and duplexes was a start, right? I ended up flipping some houses, and I got into the scale side of it, but that was the start because I wanted the cash flow. I valued putting something in my pocket when I was sleeping. That was what I really valued. So, yeah.
I love it. I was going to ask you that. What did you do with that property? Okay, so you kept it for cash flow. Out of curiosity, you still have it or sold it? Okay.
No. So, just as a quick side note, as a fresh-faced, bushy-eyed Australian coming and realizing what Section 8 housing is, no wonder they're so cheap, and had my issues. Had a drive-by shooting at this property. Had all the things that could potentially go wrong. Didn't lose my shirt on it. Made some money. Made some cash flow along the way. Got me going. Right. Learnt what not to do, but again, I got to a stage of I was comfortable with my own ability to say, let's go out and do this.
Yeah, I love it. So I know you transitioned at some point from buying these small duplexes and triplexes into larger apartments.
Mm-hmm.
How and why did you make that transition? Because it's different, right? A duplex is different, it's value different, you add value differently. Like how and why did you go to that next step?
I think it's, again, so the how was through, or the sort of the spark, I should say, was through a conversation with a good friend of mine who'd come to New York City end of 2013. I had 2 or 3 properties at this stage, still working full-time, grinding. I'm boasting to him like, hey, man, I got 7 units, like killing it,
Yeah.
And he turns around to me. He's from Canada, and he says to me, oh, Reed, that's fantastic. And I didn't even know he was in real estate at this point. And he says, oh, I closed on a 70-unit deal. And I said, 70, like 70, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 70, 69, 70. He's like, yeah. It's like, how the hell did you do that? And he told me he got a mentor. He told me about other people's money. He told me about raising some money from friends and family to put down a down deposit, sell a carryback financing, all these things that I'd known about. He'd actually gone out and done. And the biggest thing that I took away from that was a mentor. And Mike, up until that stage, I had known in the back of my mind, the statement I said before, I went and took that $35,000 I had, and I could have spent it on more mentor and more education, but I went and got my first deal, right? Yeah. I knew at some point, not then, but I knew over a period of time that I'd get to the end of my rope, and I'd know I'd need that mentor, right? Yeah. Self-education's great, but you come to a point where you need a coach in your corner. And for me, I knew I had the ability to do that, and the inspiring story of my mate Scott, I was like, if he can do it, why can't I? I've already moved halfway across the world. I already started in this game. It's just, again, pushing my boundaries, getting comfortable pushing my boundaries. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And that's when I actually sold the first property to free up a little bit of cash to go get a mentor and then work on my brand and my story, because it was an interesting story. And I was finding out all these incredible things in the United States. And I knew other international folks would be interested in that story, or even just the Americans would be interested. So That's where I started down the personal brand to try and raise capital and try and build my investor database in order to, fund these bigger deals that I wanted to go out and chase. So that's easy, gloss over all the hard parts in that, but that was sort of the start of the spark to get me into that scaling piece and get into commercial real estate.
So let me ask you brought it up briefly there. What's one thing that a challenge that you faced when you kind of transitioned from the small duplex, triplex into an apartment building? What's something that maybe it wasn't a challenge? What surprised you? Like what kind of was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize, and you had to adjust and adapt and learn, and like where did that stumble come, if ever?
Yeah, not necessarily a stumble, but more of a mental block. Was more around the asking of the money for a deal and knowing that the deal was worth asking friends and family for money, right? That's I think the imposter monster, right? The imposter syndrome of like, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to go and ask someone for $100,000 to invest in this deal I've just found? Yeah. And that's where you got to have the confidence, even though you haven't done a big deal before, to know that you've got to put in the foundations to educate people, right? And so what I did was I started my own podcast back in 2014 called Investing in the US. It's still going today. And it was just about the story and the steps. The first 20 episodes of that podcast was literally about the individual steps I started to learn as I came into this country. And what I realized, and again, I'm a structural engineer. I'm pretty black and white brain. I love maths. I didn't have any gray or creativity there, but what I learned was people are going to invest in you first and foremost. And if they don't trust you, then you can't even get to the point of the ask. I can't ask you for money without my trust, without you gaining my trust.
Right.
And it takes a long time to gain that trust, and it can go away in an instant if you're not careful. So really building a brand around transparency, vulnerability, my story, being just down to earth and approachable. That's what has ultimately helped fund those first early deals and grow from there. But it came from a place of, I knew I had to go out and use a platform like podcasting to tell my story. And that was the most, and that can go for any business, right? Not just real estate, but when you're trying to attract an audience, attract, employees or partners or money or whatever what it might be, people want to know the story. And that's what's really important. They invest in you first and foremost, and the deal's is actually secondary.
Yeah,
so
definitely. So let's talk about that a minute. You've mentioned personal brand a little bit. You talked about it again just now. Why is it important? Why was it important? Why is it important for you to build a personal brand? And do you suggest that other real estate investors try to build a personal brand?
Yeah, look, there's so much with social media. There's so much people saying, I've got a microphone and look at me. And it's not about being Tony Robbins or, Tim Ferriss or, Gary Vee. It's about being the key person of influence. And I interviewed a gentleman who wrote the book Key Person of Influence on my show called Dan Priestley. Great guy, and highly recommend that book. It's all about being that KPI in your sphere, right? Mm-hmm. The 500 people you are top of mind when it comes to real estate, right? You can have 500 investors and you can do just fine and growing a real estate business with 500 investors, right? You don't need the millions of people like the Tony Robbins has following them. Right. But they had to start from nothing, right? And that's where, again, going back to the trust and transparency, you start with friends and family because they trust you already because you're a friend of theirs or you're a family member, right? They already know that, hey, I already know Reed's a good guy. He seems to got his head screwed on. He's an engineer, right? But then changing their mindset of like, well, aren't you an engineer? Now you get into real estate and you're asking me to invest in these deals. What WTF? Yeah. Like, what's going on? Yeah. And so that's through the repetitive education of the podcast or the brand or whatever medium you choose to get your message across is the education of what you do. Yeah. And that I remember that first ask on that first deal I ever tried to raise $500,000 for. I thought, I'm going to crush this. I think I had like 50 or 60 people on my email list. And I was like, I'm going to easily get to that. I'm going to email them all. I know them all personally. Yeah. And it was crickets, absolute radio silence. And it was a cold shower and the realization that I have not done enough on the education piece for that ask, right? And they talk about touches in social media and branding. And it's, back in the day, it used to be 7, I think it was. You got to tell someone 7 times before it sinks in. You yell at your kids or you tell your kids something 7 times before it's like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. In this day and age with all this social media stuff, it's now 24, 25 times. Yeah. So what I realized was it wasn't them, it was me that I hadn't educated them enough about what I was transitioning to try and do and how I could support them in their growth and their needs of wanting to get in real estate themselves or invest some money in their real estate, but they didn't have the time or the energy. And so for me, it was that cold shower of the realization that, okay, I need to do more with the podcast, I need to do more with the branding, I need to do more with the publicly facing output to then have people go, aha, I know what he's doing and I don't have any questions and I want to invest. You know what I mean? So that's what you're bombarding people with information so they can trust you again to say, yes, I want to invest in Reed.
So as far as building that personal brand, is it a credibility builder?
100%.
Okay. So is that where you find a lot of your investors for your syndications? Is it coming through your podcast?
I don't have a direct, that's the problem, right? Like, and it takes someone hearing me on a show like this or my own podcast and they come on the website. I don't know if they don't know where they come from. I should probably gather that information, but tracking it all the way through to becoming an investor is, that sort of organic growth is a little bit hard to track, but it is, I guess without doing it, if I go back and didn't do the podcast or didn't do this branding stuff, I'm sure I wouldn't be in the place I am today without it. So that probably as much answers the question.
Okay. That's fair. Okay. So tell me a little bit about syndication. First of all, for the listeners who don't know, define what a syndication is or give them some idea. And then how did you get started? How do you start syndicating? What's that look like?
So syndication is the pooling of people's money together and you buying a larger deal that one individual couldn't buy on their own. So think of it like a great analogy I use is an airplane. Like if I want to go hire a 747 to get me from Los Angeles to New York City, it would cost me, Reed Goossens, a lot of bloody money, right? Yeah. But if I go share it with 100 passengers, 200 passengers on the plane, we can all enjoy the journey from point A to point B. And in this scenario, in real estate, it happens to be from having cash to growing it in terms of wealth and cash flow. And then in the same plane analogy, there's a captain and co-pilot, and that's who I am. My business partner and I, we are flying the plane. There's first class where you might have, which could be the general partnership. You might have some people coming in who brought you the deal, or might be coming in, bolstering your bank account balance or your lending ability, and they're sitting in first class. And then you have everyone sitting in the back who are your LP investors, your limited partner investors, and they're enjoying the in-flight entertainment, but they're only having to pay a portion for that one seat, not the whole plane. And so we get to pool everyone together, get on that plane, and we fly from point A to point B, which happens to be long-term wealth and financial freedom.
That happens to be the best description and analogy for a syndication I've ever heard. That was really, really good. I like that. And no one can possibly have a question about what it means now. So how do you do that? How did you start this? How does one go about this?
Yeah. So back to the mentor, right? Back to that conversation with my mate, Scott. Finding a mentor who was actively doing deals, right? Aspiring to be someone else. And I'd found a small mentor. He's now quite large in today's world. I was one of his early students, but really that mentor was also just another bet on myself. And it wasn't that he had the keys to the kingdom. It was more the fact that I was parting ways with money and giving myself permission to say, hey, I'm worth this. I'm worth taking this next step in my career because I'm getting someone who's going to be in my court, is going to be able to look over my shoulder. And so through that mentor, I was able to co-syndicate on his deals. So I wasn't necessarily had to worry about finding the deals, but maybe just work with my brand and bring a small piece of money to the table, and be in that first class analogy that I spoke about before. Yeah. And that's helps build the credibility, right? Like that, I get to use his credibility right on his coattails. And it got to the point after doing, I think, 2 or 3 deals with him that I eventually broke out on my own because I built that system of people was seeing what I was already pitching them on, my flyer and hypothetical situations. Then I actually went and we got a live deal together with my mentor, and we raised some money, and then the second deal and the third deal. And then on the fourth deal, I was like, I can do this by myself, and I can, go be my own captain of my plane. And that's where I broke out. But it happened over many years, but that was the start, right? It was, whether you're in syndication or fix and flipping or wholesaling, like getting someone a mentor that you can use their credibility in order to grow your business is really vital and really key. Yeah. And that's what that mentor did for me. I
love it. I love that message. It's great. I know people get caught up. I did it. I was notorious for the way too long. I spent 6 years after I started flipping. So I told you I kind of procrastinated and lived in fear for 5 years. And then for 6 years, I self-educated, and I had some success. I was making money. I was growing, but I was growing super slow. I was making tons of mistakes. I was hitting the ceiling of what I could do on my own, and all those things, until I realized that I needed a mentor. I needed to surround myself with the kind of people that could help me get to the next level. And I did. Excuse me. But what year was it when you went out on your own? Like, how long ago from now was that?
Yeah, that was 2016.
Okay.
It's only 4 years, but at that point I'd be, it was 2014. I got the mentor. There was sort of 2.5 years in there of doing deals with him and stuff, and then broke out on my own. And that's where I really was able to scale that business.
Okay. Got it. And now, are you doing exclusively apartments? Is that the game?
Yep.
Okay.
That's it. Exclusively apartments. Yep.
How are you finding them all around the LA area, or are you all over the United States?
Good question. I'm only focused in Austin and San Antonio. So actually, I'm interstate. Okay. And I'm sure a natural question will be, well, how'd you get there? Well, it was through.
Don't say a girl, because that's not okay anymore. Don't say a girl.
Don't say a girl. Yeah. So through those couple of first deals I did with the mentor, he was already doing some stuff in Dallas and Houston. And I liked that market. And so I was looking in San Antonio, a market he was not in with his business partner. And it was a bit more, obviously more affordable than LA, right? There was cash flow there. Remember, cash flow. Yep. And what I was realizing, I was getting very close and I was looking at 50, 60 unit deals. getting on best and final calls with the seller. So clearly my underwriting was good. Clearly I'd built some rapport with the broker, but there was still just that little bit, that element that was missing of just being physically not there, right? And having an accent, right? Yeah. So needed to find boots on the ground and have someone who could be my yin to my yang, right? Had complementary skill sets. And that was where I found my business partner, Andrew. He was born and raised in Austin, Texas. He doesn't have the skill sets that I have, and I don't have the skill sets he has, given that he was born there and knows a lot of people, right? So he could have those broker relationships. And that's where we formed a partnership on the first one. And I remember underwriting, 60 or 70 deals in San Antonio before we got one. And the broker gave us, sort of backed us with the seller to say, hey, these guys can do this. And that's where we broke out on our own and did the whole flying the airplane by ourselves, which was scary. It's by no means, and it was definitely a bumpy takeoff, but we got there in the end.
So a question I want to ask you, I know this is the answer could be very, very lengthy, but let's see if we can do a good job at keeping it relatively high level. How do you underwrite an apartment building? What are the steps you take to do that?
Yeah, how to underwrite? So there's obviously different ways. There's not obviously different ways. There's a handful of ways you can do it, right? And depending on the size of the building, stuff that's 100, 200, 300 units is going to be a little bit more complex than, say, a 10 or a 20 unit deal. But ultimately, you want to look at the NOI, the net operating income, and you want to see if that NOI has a good market, what's a cap rate that they're trying to sell it for? And how does that compare to the market cap rate? And how does that then compare to your interest rates? So for example, if I've got a deal, they want to sell it to me and it's and then their in-place NOI, what they're telling me is the in-place NOI. Remember the nuances that it might be a little bit fudged, but what they're telling me, the NOI is maybe call it a 5.5 cap, right? Okay, what's the market at? Well, if the market's at a 6, then it's clearly probably a little bit overpriced. But if there's value there that you could see where you could grow, you can push that NOI over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and maybe a stabilized NOI might be a 6 or a 7 cap, and might get interest rates at a 4%. Well, that spread there, that's going to give me some cash flow, right? Yep. So overall, you want to look at NOI, you want to compare it to the market. But again, the in-place cap rate to me these days doesn't mean a ton. It just I use it as a valuation stick. Yep. It's really what I'm going to move the needle for in terms of the NOI in the next 3 to 5 years, and where my interest rates are today. And if I can get a spread between the cap rates and the interest rates, then I know I'm going to get cash flow, and that cash flow means that can pay my investors, and we can cash flow the deal and then sell it for an equity multiple in whatever 5, 6, 7, 10 years time.
Yeah. How often is it when you buy an apartment, how often is it that it's under rented or undervalued? The rents are too low. Like, is it a combination of two, or like what else can go into it, and how much are those the driving factors?
Yeah. So look, there's definitely there's obviously an element, you have to have value to be added, right? You're never not doing value add. Yeah. So whether it be through market rents, whether it be through, another big one we do, which a lot of people don't talk about, is changing the renter demographic, right? So the way you might have an average renter who's earning $35,000 or $40,000 a year, but you want to get that up to 50 or 60. Just by doing that, they can afford more rent, right? And if you're renovating in the way that they're attracted to, amenities, really clean finishes, stainless steel appliances, all that sort of stuff that they want, and it's in a path of progress, then that's, your comps may not be saying that you can get $200 rental bumps, but if you're focused on changing the demographic as well as getting those $200 rental bumps, with the top quality renovation, then that can be a really killer type of business plan. Nice. So that to me that's how we value our value add. Yeah.
And I assume your mentor taught you how to underwrite. But by the way, just so everyone understands, underwriting is basically determining what the value or what you should buy it for, kind of understanding the numbers of the deal. Did your mentor teach you that stuff, or did you learn something else?
No. I look, yes and no. I'm very handy with a spreadsheet, given in that I'm an engineer. So I actually taught him a little bit, but it was more the capital raising, the branding side that I got him for. And actually his business partner that I met, he taught me a lot of. He's more like me, thinks very analytically and operationally. So he actually taught me a lot about the more complications when you get to larger deals, and loss to lease and bad debt and all those sort of things that come into it.
Okay, great. So now you're in the syndication deals. You're kind of going along the way here. It's 2016, going on 17, whatever. How did you scale, right? It's one thing, you found a partner, I get that, but how did you actually scale? Because scaling sometimes is where people fall apart because they either go too fast or too reckless, they hire the wrong people. Like, how did you manage to scale up and stay profitable?
Yeah, for us, it's keeping it very lean. And to this day, we have 2,200 units in the portfolio, about $250 million value. Just give you sort of a yardstick, not to boast, but just to inspire. We still do it very lean. We still do third-party property management. I do all the asset management, construction management. Now, as we grow and we want to go double the portfolio, we're bringing people in-house, but we've raised that $50,000 at a time. We do deal by deal. But the biggest thing you ask about scale is proof that we can do it, and proof that to the brokers that, remember that first deal, I spoke briefly about it before, the broker had to bet on us as much as they had to give us a chance, right? Because they have to prove to the seller that, hey, these guys are going to be able to close. So through that broker, we actually got the first, second, and third deal through that broker. And the first two deals were from the same seller because we performed. And that's so important about being able to perform and close on a deal and do what you're going to say you're going to do. Super valuable. Like I can't stress it enough. And everyone's going to ask, well, like, how do I get the opportunity? It literally comes through knocking at the door, knocking at the door, knocking at the door, knocking at the door, knocking at the door. Someone's going to open eventually, right? And it takes time. It won't happen the first time you respond to a broker, but you do it over 60, 70 deals, you're going to hang around the hoop and then someone's going to give you a chance.
And since you mentioned the value of the doors and all that, you mentioned early on when you found your partner, you underwrote like 50 or 60 deals before you got one. Now we're 4 years into this. How many deals have you actually closed on? Are we talking about half
8.
a dozen, 10 dozen? Okay. All right. So close.
We're now going on 9 and we've got the 10th one lined up. So it definitely is less as you do more, but also as deals become thinner, you have to understand the different value add propositions and our investment strategies change a little bit over time. Don't need to get into that, but it's more to do with just the sheer volume when you're starting, in a market to prove to people that you're worth your weight in gold.
What are some of the challenges that you have faced as a remote investor? You don't live in Texas. What, if any? I mean, is there anything that's a challenge or anything unique to that situation?
That's the benefit of the yin and the yang with Andrew being local. We have third-party property management. You can do this business from the moon if you wanted to, if you've got decent internet. I'm on calls pretty much nearly every day with my regional managers. I'm on calls twice a week with the teams, both in San Antonio and Austin. And then I've got underwriting calls. I've got 2 underwriters that work for me. One lives in New York, one lives in San Francisco. So very much in the age of telecommuting, if is that the word? But I am in Texas twice a month, so I'm very much seen as we grow the business, and I'll probably have to move there eventually. But as we start to vertically integrate and bring some of those outside, property management, we bring that in house. But that really only makes sense once you get to a certain stage and size. And so for me, it's been challenging, but it's also been, that's the life I want to live, right? I want to live by the beach. The whole point of getting involved in this business is I don't have to live in the backyard. It doesn't have to be in my backyard to invest.
Absolutely. Well said. I like that. We're kind of getting close to the end here, but I want to ask you, because I'm sure the kind of guy you are, engineer minded. I don't want to put words in your mouth. First, two-part question. Number one, do you see a change coming in the market?
Depends on what you see as change, right? I do see, blood in the street, right? We're talking about 2008. When you break out 2008 versus where we are today, there's a lot more money sitting on the sidelines than there were in 2008. So deals are still getting done today, particularly large commercial multifamily. Secondly, this pandemic or this recession is backed by a pandemic, where 2008 was backed by a crash in the financial system.
Right.
So two separate sorts of beasts, right? We're going to have its own problems with getting back to some normalcy with jobs and sporting events and concerts and just feeling good about spending money and growing the GDP, right, of the country. There's all that part of it that's going to be different. So I think I don't have a crystal ball in terms of, deals are just going to go for rock bottom values. I think a lot of people learnt a ton, particularly the lending industry learned a ton from 2008. So they're trying to work with borrowers now if people are in bad ways in the deal.
Yeah.
I also think that multifamily in general is the golden child right now compared to other commercial asset classes. So particularly in a place like Austin, which is really growing, we're seeing we just won a deal with our private equity partner. There was 35 offers on that deal, and big companies from coastal markets are now looking in stuff like in Austin, Texas. Yeah. So right now, my vision is thinking we're not through the fire yet, but we're still seeing a lot of competition and low interest rates with low cap rates. Plus, it's an election year, so I don't think a lot's going to happen. Yeah. I think come Q1 next year, it'd be very interesting to see if anyone knows about NMHC, which is the National Multifamily Housing Convention. That's where a lot of deals hit the market in January. I'll be very interested to see how many deals hit the market then and maybe have held on for the last 6 months through the pandemic just to survive to get to NMHC. So I don't have a crystal ball yet. I don't know if that really answers your question, but you got to keep your finger on the pulse regardless of what industry you're in and what market you're in and understanding where the growth is.
Yeah, there's opportunities in every market. It's just
100%.
knowing where you are in that cycle is really the key. People ask me all the time,
Correct.
how's real estate? Like, it's great because I pay attention.
Exactly.
Well, listen, Reed, this has been a blast. I could talk to you all day. I can tell you're just a fun guy to talk to, very easy to talk to, super knowledgeable, and just like what you're doing. It's clear that you like what you're doing. So I had a blast talking to you. Let's tell folks where they can find you. Anything else? I know you got a podcast. It's Investing in the U.S. That's the podcast?
That's
Investing
correct.
in the U.S. Go to that podcast, give it a rating, give it a review, subscribe. That's gold to us podcasters. And you wrote a book. Tell us a little bit about that real quick before we go, and any other thing else that you want to know.
Sure. So the first, I've got 2 books actually. So the first book is just literally all the best episodes from the podcast in book form. So it's called Investing in the US, The Ultimate Guide to US Real Estate. Very much a written form of the journey, again, with my story interwoven through the pages. So you can find that on Amazon. We just launched the audio book of that if you're into audiobooks. That's the first book. The second book is called 10,000 Miles to the American Dream, which I did with 6 other Aussie investors who've all made their way out across the ditch and have achieved financial freedom through some form of US real estate. And that launched last year, and the audiobook is about to launch here in the next couple of months. That's also on Amazon. And listen to the podcast. And look, the easiest way to get in contact with me is just go to reedgoossens.com. That's ReedGoossens. And if anyone getting on a plane, they're coming through New York, LA, and they want to say g'day, just shoot me an email at info@reedgoossens.com. We can go for a beer and talk shop.
I love it, man. I love it. Real quick, you're doing the audiobook. Did you read it?
Mate, 80-20 rule. No, I did not.
All right, good. Either way, I was going to say good. It's like, hey, man, good for you if you did it. And if you didn't do it, good for you. You learned how to outsource. That's good.
I selectively did. I did the intro. I did the first chapter, and I did all the challenges that I do at the end of every chapter. I did those things. You can still hear my voice. It was just like, I've got other things to go do.
I wrote a book myself. I haven't done the audiobook yet, and I'm really debating whether or not I want to do it or have it done. So anyway.
My only advice on that is like do the intro, the forward, and maybe, the transitions of every chapter so people can hear you. I think that's important. Yeah. But the majority of it, hire a professional to do it. I'm sure your time is more valuable.
Here's the question it just occurred to me. So when Americans hire voiceover talents or voice talents, typically it's like Australian, it's English, and please tell me you hired an American to do this book. That would be hilarious. Because your voice, see, that's funny. We all want to sound like you, or not all of us, but that's who we hire typically. It's funny you hired an American. How funny is that?
It was more to do with the fact there's no way they're going to get me confused. You know what I mean?
That's true. Good point. That's great, man. Well, listen, thanks again for doing this. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy, positive vibes, and all the knowledge that you shared.
Thank you.
It's super fun to talk to guys like you. So thanks for doing it.
Mate, my pleasure, and doing a great job. So
all right,
awesome.
Man. Thank you. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed that episode and that conversation. I had a good time talking to Reed. He's a fun guy, smart guy, and he's just got a great attitude and kind of a fun, I don't know if that came through. I think it did, kind of a fun idea and attitude about his business and just a good sense of humor about it all. And I like that. He's genuinely having a good time in his business in real estate. And that's a lot of fun. He also mentioned, and I don't want this to go unnoticed, how important it was for him to have a mentor, to have someone in his corner helping him, bouncing ideas, teaching him, and cutting through that learning curve. Really, Reed is a really smart guy. I love the way he kind of built his business responsibly. He learned from a mentor. He started small. Now he's scaling up and doing these big syndication deals. It's just the way it is. You start small. Like he said, you don't do your 10th deal until you do your first deal. So with that in mind, guys, go out there and do your first deal. Make today the day that you get started. We'll talk to you next time. Okay. You're still there. You're still listening. That's awesome. And I really appreciate that. Now, hopefully it wasn't an accident. Hopefully you didn't leave the room and I'm just talking to an empty room right now. But assuming you're still there, I want to do something really, really cool for you. For a limited time, I want to give you a free digital download of my book, the entire book, Level Jumping. If you're a listener to the show, you know it just came out and it really details how I took my business from being like one where I was just doing a few deals a month, maybe 1 or 2 deals a month, to doing over 10 and sometimes 15 deals a month and over 100 a year. And I went from doing very little profit to over $1 million in profit. And I made that transformation in a 12-month period. And this book talks about what I did, the steps I took to transform my business and how you can too. So grab a free digital download and you can get that by texting the words "just start" as 2 words now, "just start" to the number 55444. So text "just start" to 55444. I will send you a free digital download of my book. It's the complete book. There's nothing held back, and that'll be completely yours just for making it to the end of the show and listening to me. And I really, really appreciate it, guys. So I want to do something nice for you. I do this every once in a while at the end of shows, and if you listen to the very end, every once in a while, I do a giveaway like this. So hopefully you enjoy that. Go grab a free copy. I hope you read it. I hope you love it. Reach out. Let me know what you think. All right, guys. Talk to you next time.